Hey, thanks for stopping by. And of course, before you go any further, subscribe. It is free to you and enables YouTube to pay me for this work. So herewith, I want to discuss anodizing or de-anodizing and de-painting aluminum bike parts. So with bicycle components, these days, most of the stuff comes to you finished in some cases. Many cases, it's anodized black or painted black. I think it's probably a little cheaper for the manufacturers, but really all aluminum needs to be finished in some way because aluminum doesn't really react great to oxygen. So having some sort of finish on it is important. And the thicker the finish, the harder it is for things to penetrate. The problem is that things do penetrate, and cranks, as you can see here, are particularly susceptible to having the finish wear off. So overshifting, which is probably what this is about, can be a problem, can have crank strike, and of course your ankle or shoe or pant leg rubbing. You know, if you're going around 100 revolutions a minute, quickly there can be a lot of rubbing rubbing adds up fast. So this stuff can get kind of gross looking, and that is no reason to throw away the part. I happen to be a fan of naked aluminum that is nicely polished. It's probably because I'm old and that was what was common, but it's also because I hate looking at this stuff. But here, a little bit about this. There is a bike shortage going on, and I've been building up as a project a bike that needs 170 millimeter cranks. I've had a hard time sourcing the cranks because of the global component shortage. And I finally saw something that was kind of in my sweet spot of price. It was a crank set, so 2 rings, bottom bracket, and cranks. And because it was beat up, no one was bidding on it. So I decided I would purchase it and do the de-anodizing myself. Now, anodizing, as I said, it's important. Probably this is what's called type 2 anodizing. It's easy to do, it's fairly inexpensive. The result, when it's new, looks good. Obviously, it can look pretty bad. So to remove it, there are a couple things. You can, or at least what was recommended to me, was to take Simple Green, basically let Simple Green sit on the components for like 15 minutes, and then take a steel bit that has wire brushes, a wire brush bit, I guess is what we call it. Something like this, basically, and you put it in a drill and you spin it, and then you will grind off the finish. And when it's done, take this, which is a spray-on ceramic coating, which protects the aluminum and makes it look good, and that was the recommendation to do. So I was all hip to try it, but before I started the project, I figured I should also find out what other people are saying. Another recommendation was to take Zepp's Purple Extreme Degreaser. Basically, create a bath, let the components sit in the bath for 15-20 minutes, and you can probably just wipe off the finish. That was one suggestion. Another suggestion was to take Drano. Mix Drano with hot water. Obviously, you want to do it in a well-ventilated area. Obviously, you don't want to get Drano on your skin. So after letting your components sit in Drano with hot water for a while, you take it out, rinse thoroughly with water, and then you use Scotch-Brite, which is the green stuff on this sponge, and soak this Scotch-Brite with WD-40, and that can work as a polish, and then you could finish with a polish like I have here. So I figured I'd give a number of these methods a try. I'm going to start with the brushing, the wire brushing, and that is what we'll go with first. We will see how it goes, and as this, anyways, come back and we'll talk about how it looks. right, so I've been at it for about 10-15 minutes of using the wire brush bit, the coarse one, and I have this. As you see, not a perfect job. I've missed here, here, over here, but I've gotten most of it off. I somehow left the back clean. It looks, so it has a brushed as opposed to polished finish, not surprisingly because it's a wire brush. Thing is that it's not as shiny as this little bit here, and you can feel it texture-wise. This is a lot smoother, and I'd love to get it smoother. So now, after using the coarse brush on this, I am going to try the fine brush and see how it cleans up from there. That's what's next. I'm actually kind of starting to like the way this looks, but I definitely want to get it shinier, a little less brushed, a little more polished looking. So I'm going to try, just for the sake of experimenting, a Brillo pad. Now here's a Brillo pad, not this gnarly one. I'm going to get a new one, see what that does, and then So I've taken the coarse brush and the fine wire brush, and I've gotten this. I think it looks okay. It looks like a cheap aluminum component, but I'd like to maybe not get it to a mirror finish so much, but more, a little shinier. Take out, you can see the little wire brush scratches. Anyways, you can hopefully see that. Smooth it out. I was hoping to find some 600 grit sandpaper or 800 grit and 1500 grit, as that's what I saw recommended. But the problem is I haven't been able to find those, and I went to 4 hardware stores. The first one had 600 grit only. The second one had the highest of 300 grit. And then Home Depot had nothing I needed, and you had to buy a larger quantity, which is very Home Depot. And finally I went to a fourth, and I got 800. The grits are, the higher the number, the finer the grit. It has to do with CAMI, which stands for, hold on, I had to write it down because I had never heard of it before. It is the Coated Abrasive Manufacturers Institute. That is the, we use their ratings for sandpaper in the US. There's also an ISO standard, and that usually is done with a P. In both cases, the higher the number, the finer the particles. Sandpaper, as you know, is not sand on paper anymore. It's most likely aluminum oxide or silicon carbide. And the smaller the particles, the higher the number. And when you get into like above, I think 500 or so, it's best to use them wet, which is to say you wet the sandpaper. And that actually helps make the scratches that you're making finer. It also helps cart away the dust that you're creating. So I am going to cut some squares of, this is the 800, but I'll start with the 600. Usually you start with coarse and you move your way to finer. So I'll cut out a small rectangle of this, do some sanding, and then when I like what I see, I will then move on to the 800, cut another small rectangle, wet sand it, and if it looks good, I will then take some aluminum polish here, polish it up pretty well, and then when that's done, I'll coat it with that ceramic coating, and if I like the results, whether or not I like the results, I'll show it to you, but I'll leave it at that, and then I'll take my left crank arm and I'll turn it silver too. So that's where we're at. Stay tuned. Give a watch. after about 5 minutes with the 600 grit sandpaper and another 5 with the 800, I have the crank. I think it's looking pretty good. It is not as buffed as I'd like, and it certainly isn't mirror-like, but at the same time, I think this is totally acceptable and something that in the pre-painted component days, or even maybe mid-tier components would look like this. My goal was to get it as smooth and as polished as that, but of course with this, you do probably in a 2-hour bike ride something in the range of 10,000 pedal strokes. So this could be from hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pedal strokes, and to have it quite as smooth and reflective would take a fair amount of time, and I don't have the requisite sandpaper. So I am eventually going to source some of the maybe 1200 or 1500 grit sandpaper, see how that goes. And basically with all the sandpapers, you just keep going higher in number until you get the desired level of reflectivity or sheen. So what I'm going to do is I am going to polish the crank and then seal it. So use my Brasso here because it says it works on aluminum. I'm going to polish it, rinse that off, let it dry, then then rub in some of the ceramic spray coating, and I'll give you a shot of what that looks like. And then when that's done, I will take this crank and I will do all the steps in rapid succession as opposed to all the examining and fawning and explaining, and I'll see what kind of time frame that is. So stay tuned. Okay, now that I've done the drive side crank and I'm reasonably satisfied with it, it's not quite the sheen I want. There still are some scratches, but overall, I think it looks pretty decent. I did a two-tone thing, as you see. I'm gonna work on the non-drive. I still have this little polish spot, which probably hundreds of thousands of pedal revolutions did a nice job of getting through the anodizing and making it nice and reflective. But I'm gonna try to get that kind of finish in much less time with a little more work. So I'm gonna start with the Purple Extreme, do this for probably like half hour. Then, in a change from the original protocol, I'm gonna skip using the coarse, go straight to the fine wire brush. When I'm done with the fine wire brush, I will go with the sandpaper. I will use the 600, followed by the 800. And then when that's done, follow it up with the Brasso polish, and then the ceramic spray. I'm hoping to do it straight through to give you more of a timed run to see how long it takes when you know what you're doing, or know a little better than at least the first time. So I'll get going and I'll check back at the end. See how long it takes to take off the anodizing. Okay, 5 minutes in, less than 5 minutes in, and a pretty good progress. After about 20 minutes of sanding or wire brushing, it's looking all right. Next up, 600 series sandpaper. All right, 5 minutes with the 600 sandpaper. Okay, now it's time for the 800 sandpaper, and we'll do 5 minutes with the 800. Supposed to actually apply it to a cloth first. Soak it. Oops. Exactly. Okay, finishing up with the crank. Okay, so I'm back. I'm done. I finished the left side crank arm. I think it looks pretty good. As you can see, I did a two-tone finish. It was mostly by accident when I started, and then I thought I kind of like it, and it simplifies things for me. Anyways, I'd say it looks better than the right side. Here, we'll just put up the pictures. Using the coarse wire brush was probably a mistake, so I wouldn't recommend doing that in the future. When I see these, they kind of seem like a finish of a mid-level component back in the days when Ultegra and Force and Chorus were made of aluminum and not anodized. So I'm happy and I can recommend it going forward. I timed the effort. It goes like this. I sprayed on the degreaser, I waited 30 minutes, then 20 minutes working the drill with a fine wire brush. I actually had to take a break in the middle because my battery died in my cordless drill. Then I did 5 minutes with 600 grit sandpaper, 5 minutes with 800 grit sandpaper, dried that off. Then I applied the Brasso, the aluminum polish, and that was in the 4 to 5 minute range as well. Dried that off, and then I brought out the CMX spray. That was also in the 4 to 5 minute range. So basically somewhere between 60 and 70 minutes to do this left arm. If I wanted to do the whole thing, I think probably be closer to an hour and a half would be my guess. It would take a fair amount more of wire brushing. That would be probably the biggest investment. It would probably be over 30 minutes of wire brushing. So that kind of makes the Drano method of soaking in a Drano bath more appealing. I didn't want to get into those chemicals, but going forward, it is certainly something to consider. In terms of costs, I had a drill, which would have been the biggest outlay. Otherwise, it was $4 a piece for the wire brush drill bits. If you have to choose one, just go with the fine, but having the coarse in case the anodizing is particularly thick, it would probably be a good idea. Still, those were $4 a piece, so that's $8 in total. A sheet of sandpaper was 60 cents from one place and I think 75 from another. I had the orange degreaser, but I spent $4.95 on the purple. I don't know if that was significantly better, but it's also something I can use in the future. I spent the biggest outlay, actually, surprisingly, single thing, was the ceramic spray, but that comes in a big bottle and can be used on probably most bike components. And the auto parts guy said, man, you can even use it on your sunglasses. So don't know if I'm doing that, but anyways, be something to play around with. So I spent around $36 plus a few hours of my time. And everything I purchased, as I said, can be used going forward. So that's a good thing. In terms of polishing components in the future, I would suggest, or at least for myself, I think I'm going to track down some 1,000 grit or 1,200 grit sandpaper because I think that would look even better and it would probably just take a couple extra minutes of work. And so that would be something I'd recommend going forward. It might not be something easy to find at a local hardware store, so maybe plan ahead for that. Otherwise, I say go for it. You can take some kind of dinged up parts that are looking really gross and make them as good as new or better than new. And if you even have polished aluminum components and they're looking a little worn out, you can use, maybe skip the wire brush, but definitely the sandpaper application would brighten them up a good bit. You wouldn't want to go too extreme, of course, because that kind of OCD is not healthy for anybody. So anyways, check it out, do it, and as I've said at the top of the video, or many of my videos, please like it and please subscribe. And I've got more things planned, so I look forward to seeing you soon.